The year was 490 BC, and the Persian Empire stood as the most terrifying military force the world had ever seen. Their armies had conquered everything from India to Egypt, crushing entire civilizations beneath their sandaled feet. Now Emperor Darius the Great had set his sights on a small collection of Greek city-states that dared to defy his absolute power. The target was Athens, and the weapon of choice was an unstoppable invasion force of 90,000 elite Persian warriors, the finest soldiers gold could buy and fear could motivate. Against this massive army stood just 5,000 Athenians and their unlikely allies, about to orchestrate one of history's most shocking military victories through pure tactical genius that would echo through the ages. The Persian fleet appeared on the horizon like a dark storm cloud, their ships blackening the Aegean Sea as far as the eye could see. These weren't just any soldiers. These were the immortals, Darius's personal guard, who had never known defeat, backed by the most advanced military technology of the ancient world. Their bronze armor gleamed in the Mediterranean sun. Their curved swords thirsted for Greek blood, and their composite bows could pierce through shields like paper. The Persians had chosen Marathon Beach as their landing site, a perfect staging ground just 26 miles from Athens itself. The message was clear: surrender now or watch your city burn to ashes. In Athens, panic gripped the streets. Citizens fled toward the mountains with whatever possessions they could carry. The city's leaders faced an impossible choice: negotiate with the Persians and become another vassal state, or fight against odds so overwhelming that defeat seemed mathematically inevitable. But one man refused to accept either option. Miltiades, a brilliant military strategist who had once served with the Persian army and knew their tactics intimately, stepped forward with a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. He would take Athens' small force of citizen soldiers and somehow defeat an enemy that outnumbered them 18-1. The Athenian army that marched toward Marathon was unlike anything the world had seen before. These weren't professional soldiers, but ordinary citizens, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, who had trained together as a unified fighting force called a phalanx. Each man carried a massive bronze shield called a hoplon, an 8-foot spear, and wore whatever armor his family could afford. They fought not for gold or glory, but for something the Persian Empire could never understand: the radical new concept of democracy, the right of free men to govern themselves. As they approached the coastal plain where the Persians waited, these 5,000 Greeks knew they were marching toward what seemed like certain death. The Persian commanders couldn't believe their eyes when the Greek force finally appeared across the Marathon plain. After conquering the massive armies of Egypt and Babylon, they now faced what looked like a small militia of amateur soldiers. Persian General Datis laughed at the sight, ordering his men to prepare for what would surely be the shortest battle in military history. The Persians formed their traditional battle formation, a massive rectangular block of soldiers designed to steamroll over any opposition through sheer numerical superiority. Their plan was simple: advance forward, overwhelm the Greeks with arrows, then charge with overwhelming numbers and crush them completely. But Miltiades had spent years studying Persian tactics, and he had noticed something crucial that every other Greek commander had missed. The Persian formation was incredibly strong in the center, but relatively weak on the flanks. Their massive army was like a powerful bull, nearly unstoppable when charging straight ahead, but vulnerable if attacked from the sides. More importantly, the Persians always positioned their elite troops in the center of their formation, leaving their less experienced allied forces on the wings. This gave Miltiades an idea so counterintuitive that his own officers initially thought he had lost his mind. The genius of Miltiades' plan lay in doing exactly the opposite of what military logic dictated. Instead of trying to match the Persian center with his strongest forces, he deliberately weakened his own center and strengthened his flanks. He placed his youngest, least experienced soldiers in the middle of his formation, making them appear vulnerable to Persian attack. Meanwhile, he positioned his most elite warriors, hardened veterans, and the fiercest fighters Athens could produce, on the left and right wings of his army. To the Persians, it looked like the Greeks were making a fatal tactical error, practically inviting them to punch through the center and achieve victory. As dawn broke over Marathon Beach, both armies prepared for battle with rituals that revealed their fundamental differences. The Persians made offerings to Ahura Mazda, praying for victory to add another conquest to their growing empire. The Greeks prayed to Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, asking not for conquest, but for the survival of their homeland and their revolutionary way of life. The Persian army stretched across the plain like a golden serpent, their silk banners fluttering in the morning breeze, while the Greek phalanx stood in tight formation, shields locked together, spears bristling forward like the quills of an enormous porcupine. The battle began with the thunderous sound of 90,000 Persian feet marching forward in perfect unison. Their strategy was textbook perfect. First, unleash thousands of arrows to break up the Greek formation, then charge forward with overwhelming force and annihilate the scattered survivors. The Persian archers drew their composite bows, arrows nocked and ready to darken the sky like a plague of locusts. But Miltiades had anticipated this too. Instead of waiting passively for the arrow storm, he gave an order that shocked both armies. Charge immediately at full speed across the entire width of the battlefield. The sight of 5,000 Greeks sprinting directly into 90,000 Persians was so unprecedented that for a moment both sides couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Persian archers, expecting to have plenty of time to shoot multiple volleys at stationary targets, suddenly found Greek warriors bearing down on them at incredible speed. The Persians managed to loose only one hasty volley before the Greeks crashed into their lines like a bronze-tipped tsunami. The carefully planned Persian arrow bombardment, which should have decimated the Greek forces, had been completely neutralized by pure audacity and perfect timing. The collision between the two armies created chaos beyond imagination. In the center, exactly as Miltiades had planned, the Persian elite troops began pushing back the deliberately weakened Greek center. Persian commanders smiled grimly as they watched their best warriors drive deep into enemy territory, apparently achieving the breakthrough that would win them the battle. But this was exactly what the Greek general wanted. While the Persians focused all their attention on exploiting what they thought was a critical weakness, they failed to notice what was happening on their flanks until it was far too late. On both the left and right sides of the battlefield, the strongest Greek warriors were systematically destroying the Persian allied forces positioned on the wings. These weren't the elite Persian immortals, but auxiliary troops from conquered territories who lacked the training, equipment, and motivation of their masters. Faced with the fury of free men fighting for their homeland, these auxiliary forces began to crumble under the relentless Greek assault. The Athenian flanks, instead of being overwhelmed by superior numbers, were actually winning their individual battles through superior training, better equipment, and unshakable determination. As the Persian flanks collapsed, Miltiades revealed the true genius of his strategy. Instead of pursuing the fleeing auxiliary troops, he ordered his victorious wings to turn inward and attack the Persian center from behind. The elite Persian forces, who had been steadily advancing and pushing back the Greek center, suddenly found themselves trapped in a deadly embrace. Greeks pressed against them from the front, Greeks attacked them from both sides, and now Greeks were charging into their rear. The hunters had become the hunted in a tactical masterpiece that military academies would study for thousands of years. The psychological impact of this reversal was devastating. Persian soldiers who had entered the battle confident of easy victory now faced the terrifying reality of being surrounded by enemies who seemed to be everywhere at once. The famous Persian discipline, built through decades of conquering weaker opponents, began to crack under pressure they had never experienced before. Panic spread through their ranks like wildfire as soldiers realized that their supposedly invincible army was being systematically dismantled by a force they had initially dismissed as insignificant. the center of the battlefield, became a cauldron of bronze, blood, and desperation. Persian immortals, who had never retreated in their entire military careers, found themselves fighting for their lives against Greeks who seemed to possess supernatural strength and coordination. The Persian formation, designed to crush opposition through sheer weight of numbers, became a liability as soldiers packed too tightly together couldn't maneuver effectively. Greek spears found gaps in Persian armor, Greek shields deflected Persian swords, and the legendary Persian archery became useless in the brutal close-quarters combat that the Greeks had deliberately created. Commander Datis, watching in horror as his carefully planned invasion disintegrated before his eyes, desperately tried to rally his troops and restore order to the chaos. But the psychological momentum had shifted completely. Persian soldiers who had spent years conquering other peoples suddenly faced opponents who would rather die than submit. Every Greek warrior fought with the fury of someone defending not just territory, but an entire way of life. They weren't just soldiers in this battle. They were fathers protecting their children, citizens defending their democracy, free men refusing to become slaves. The turning point came when the Persian center, caught between advancing Greeks from the front and attacking Greeks from behind, began to buckle under impossible pressure. These elite warriors, accustomed to enemy forces fleeing at the mere sight of their approach, now faced opponents who grew more determined with every passing moment. The Greek battle cry of Eleftheria, freedom, echoed across the battlefield as the surrounded Persians realized that their numerical advantage had become meaningless in the face of superior tactics and unbreakable will. As Persian resistance collapsed, what had been an organized retreat quickly became a chaotic rout. Soldiers threw down their weapons and ran desperately toward their ships, abandoning the gold, supplies, and siege equipment they had brought to conquer Athens. The beach at Marathon, which hours earlier had been the staging ground for Persian victory, now became a scene of utter defeat as thousands of the world's most feared warriors fled in panic from a force they had vastly outnumbered. The pursuit was relentless. Greek warriors, energized by their impossible victory, chased the fleeing Persians across the coastal plain and onto the beach itself. Persian ships that had been prepared to transport conquering heroes back to Asia Minor now desperately tried to evacuate the survivors of a catastrophic defeat. Many vessels were forced to abandon soldiers still fighting on the beach, leaving them to face capture or death rather than risk the entire fleet. When the battle finally ended, the statistics told a story that seemed too incredible to believe. The mighty Persian army had lost over 6,000 soldiers, including many of their finest warriors and most experienced commanders. The Greek casualties numbered just 192 men, an almost impossible ratio that military historians still struggle to fully explain. Among the Persian dead lay Callimachus, the Athenian war archon, who had cast the deciding vote to fight rather than negotiate, proving that leadership sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. But the true genius of Marathon wasn't just tactical, it was strategic. Miltiades understood that this battle was about far more than defending Athens. It was about proving that the Persian Empire could be defeated, that the future didn't have to belong to autocracy and conquest. By achieving victory through intelligence rather than brute force, the Greeks demonstrated that free men fighting for their principles could overcome any tyranny. No matter how powerful it appeared, the aftermath of Marathon sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world. In Persia, news of the defeat created a crisis of confidence that would plague the empire for decades. Darius the Great, who had never experienced such a humiliating setback, immediately began planning an even larger invasion to restore Persian prestige. But the psychological damage was done. The myth of Persian invincibility had been shattered by 5,000 Greeks who refused to accept that numerical superiority guaranteed victory. In Greece, Marathon became the foundation myth for everything that would follow. The victory proved that their radical experiment in democracy was worth defending, that free citizens could achieve things that seemed impossible to subjects of an empire. The battle established Athens as the leading military power in Greece and set the stage for the golden age of Greek civilization that would produce philosophy, art, literature, and scientific discoveries that still influence the world today. The tactical innovations displayed at Marathon revolutionized military thinking for centuries. The double envelopment maneuver that Miltiades executed became known as the pincer movement and has been used successfully by generals from Hannibal to modern tank commanders. The principle of concentrating strength at the decisive point while accepting weakness elsewhere became a fundamental rule of military strategy that is still taught in war colleges around the world. Perhaps most importantly, Marathon demonstrated that victory in battle depends not just on numbers or equipment, but on leadership, strategy, and the willingness of soldiers to fight for something they believe in. The Persians had every material advantage: more soldiers, better equipment, superior logistics, and years of victorious experience. But they lacked the one thing that proved decisive: warriors who were fighting for their own freedom rather than someone else's conquest. The messenger Pheidippides, who ran from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory, collapsed and died after delivering the news that the city was safe. His sacrifice created the legend that inspired the modern marathon race, ensuring that this incredible tactical victory would be remembered, not just by military historians, but by millions of people around the world who participate in athletic events that commemorate the day when 5,000 Greeks defeated 90,000 Persians through courage, intelligence, and perfect execution of an impossible plan. The psychological impact of Marathon extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. For the first time in history, a small democracy had defeated the world's greatest empire through superior tactics rather than superior numbers. This victory gave the Greeks confidence to resist future Persian invasions and ultimately preserve the political and cultural innovations that would become the foundation of Western civilization. The Persian Empire never fully recovered from the shock of Marathon. Future invasions by Xerxes would be larger and more elaborate, but they would also be marked by hesitation and uncertainty that hadn't existed before. Persian commanders who had once attacked with supreme confidence now approached Greek armies with caution, always wondering if they were walking into another tactical trap designed by minds that thought differently about warfare than any enemy they had previously encountered. The genius of Miltiades lay not just in his tactical innovation, but in his understanding of human psychology. He knew that Persian armies were accustomed to facing opponents who were either inferior in training or fighting reluctantly for foreign masters. By creating a situation where elite Persian troops found themselves surrounded and outfought by motivated Greek citizens, he shattered their confidence in a way that mere defeat could never have achieved. The Battle of Marathon proved that in warfare, as in life, intelligence and determination can triumph over seemingly insurmountable odds. The 5,000 Greeks who faced 90,000 Persians understood that they were fighting not just for military victory, but for the survival of an idea, that ordinary people could govern themselves, that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and that no empire, no matter how powerful, could conquer the human spirit. This tactical masterpiece continues to inspire military leaders, political movements, and anyone facing overwhelming odds who refuses to accept that defeat is inevitable. Marathon stands as eternal proof that genius, courage, and perfect execution can overcome any numerical disadvantage, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from having the largest army, but from having the smartest plan and the will to execute it flawlessly when everything depends on getting it right the first time. The echo of those 5,000 Greek voices shouting for freedom as they charged into impossible odds still resonates today. reminding us that sometimes the greatest victories in human history come not from superior force, but from superior spirit, superior tactics, and the absolute refusal to surrender when everything you believe in hangs in the balance.